Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. And we'll be starting shortly. We're just waiting to see if others will be joining or not. In the meantime, feel free to, this is going to be very casual, very informal, so please feel free to come and go as you wish. If you want, bring something to drink, make it a happy hour, whatever you wish. Yes, Amir is taking it upon himself to help that as much as possible. Okay.
So Shahab, what's the Zoom format here? Can anyone just unmute and turn video on?
So this is that's a very good question. We've made it a meeting ideally so that it can be as open to that situation as possible. But yeah, anyone who wants can ask and turn on their audio or their video. Let me see, for example, let me give it a shot. When people are added, they join muted, but then they should let me try joining with my phone and seeing how that goes. Oh no, I don't. Do I have the link there? I don't know. Can you guys try turning on, if any of you is comfortable turning on their video? Can you guys, okay, yeah, wonderful. You can unmute yourself. That's good. I saw Romina unmuted herself right now. So it's not as if people are limited. Wonderful. Hi, Romina. Great. So there's no limitation. It's wonderful. Yay. Okay, so I guess we can take maybe 1 more minute and then get started if nobody else will join. I'm hoping that more people will join and that they're late. But anyhow, it's going to be recorded anyway, so.
Well, we might as well make some small talk, break the ice.
Makes perfect sense. So do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves if you wish? Yeah. Romina, I think you're the most open right now. So if you wish to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, what should I include in my introduction?
Whatever you wish.
Whatever I want, okay.
What you're studying, what you're doing, what your goals are, and why, why are you interested in this talk?
Yeah, so my name's Romina Nejad. I'm actually not a student, I'm a staff at Stanford. I do clinical research in psychiatry, mainly running clinical trials for depression and other mental health issues. I'm interested in this talk because it's actually one of my first PSA Fireside chats that I'm attending. So I was curious to learn some more about Amir and his journey and about all the successes essentially. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Nazanin.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Nice to meet you. I'm Nazanin. I'm a sophomore at Stanford, but I'm currently taking a gap year. I'm not entirely sure what I want to study. Right now it's economics and computer science. Tomorrow it could be SimSys. I'm really between those two options. But I'm really interested in this talk because I've always been interested in the startup space. I like to work on projects and stuff and would like to see where that goes and would love to hear about your YC experience as well, and just get to meet you.
Cool. All right.
Nice. Okay, so I guess we can start. Time is flying. We're already almost 6 minutes in, so we can get started. So thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to have you all, and we're really excited about talking to Amir and his interesting story that I recently learned more about and sharing that with you guys. So as you all probably know, Amir Movafaghi is our guest today. He has traveled from Iran, and in the US, he did his undergrad in the US at California State University, Fullerton. Later had extensive experience in industry, later getting his MBA from NYU, and going through multiple roles, especially raising in the ranks at Twitter, later on going to Spiceworks, and then now at Mixpanel as CEO. So he has this like treasure trove experience that we would like to get into, hearing it more from him himself. And yeah, so we can get started on that. Amir, thank you very much for coming. I guess first off, if there's anything that you think we left off in this very quick overview of your experience, please share that with us, and then we can dive into questions.
Yeah, no, I think you covered the LinkedIn bio perfectly.
yeah, trying to go by that to not miss anything. There's a lot of stuff in there that I couldn't mention, like PwC and other roles, but I guess I try to go with the highlights. Okay, so starting off with that, can I ask, as for the first question, how you believe your background led you from going here? First off, like your own background, both personally, your travel, as you mentioned, from Iran to Turkey, to the US, and the adversities you met during this path, and generally how you view retrospectively how you got to where you are right now, and what you wish you knew down this path.
Yeah, I think it's maybe it's helpful to just quickly connect the dots on the personal journey path, so at least contextually makes sense for everyone. So I was born in 1980. As for those of you who either know that time frame, or someone is probably, parents have told you about that time frame. I was right in the cusp of the Iranian Revolution, the war that ensued. And so I lived in Iran from 1980 to 1989. I was born in Tehran, but I spent a good number of years of my childhood in Kermanshah, where my dad was doing his residency post-medical school. And then we left Iran in 1989, did a quick pit stop in Syria, and then in Turkey, moved to Turkey, where we were supposed to get a visa to come to the US, but that didn't quite pan out as we expected. And we ended up staying in Turkey for 7 years, where I lived with my brother, and who's 4 years older than me. So it was quite an adventurous 7 years there. And I can share a lot of fun stories of what a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old would do when they're given the freedom to do whatever they want. But I went to the Iranian embassy school in Turkey. So I lived in the Asian side. Went to for those of you who've been to Istanbul, it connects Asia and Europe, and my school was on the European side, and we lived on the Asian side. So I have the luxury to say I travel continents to commute to school for a grade school and junior high. And then I moved to the US in 1995. First stop was New Hampshire. And I joke that the culture shock coming from Istanbul to New Hampshire was as big as the culture shock going from Hollis, New Hampshire to Los Angeles, which was my next stop in the US. And I was like, it's two different countries. It was just kind of unfathomable. I was the only minority in my high school in Hollis. Did like, this kid doesn't speak English. What do we do with him? And then I came to Los Angeles. It was a whole ecosystem of support system to try to get folks educated on English. And then yeah, so the rest, I think Shahab just mentioned. I obviously moved a couple of times since then. I'm 3 different high schools, and then eventually we somewhat settled down. And then the professional track, I think you all, it's public, obviously, the different stops along the way. I think Shahab, your question was, how has the journey kind of informed the professional path? Maybe the first way I would say is there's been quite a resiliency. And when you join a company, when you first enter workforce, there's a lot of there's a bunch of knowns and a ton of unknowns, and there are far more unknowns in your career, as you start, no matter what scope of role you have, especially for those of you who are on the business track and we'll join corporations or we'll work in large organizations. There are many, many different facets. The first company I worked for out of college was Marriott. It's this multinational giant, company that's a leader in hospitality. And even, within this giant company, there were so many things in flux, so many things changing. There was shortly after I graduated, we went through a whole lot of changes in hospitality, including experiencing the 9/11 attacks while I was there, and the impact that had on the on the business and the things that we had to do to react to the economic outcomes. And so the personal journey was just really helpful in that, I became quite resilient to not being shocked by the constant need to not just embrace change or react to change, but just appreciating that actually getting into the mode of leading change and actually influencing change has been a pretty big part of my career so far. So it's in that way, I think my personal and professional life are deeply connected.
No, exactly. So this is something that the first time I was talking to Amir, it came up for me that he's gone through quite a rough patch. Like again, I initially didn't understand that he was in Turkey for years, starting when he was 9 and his brother was 13 alone without their parents, which is kind of unfathomable to me as to like what they would do and how they actually get along, like how they would survive, let alone prosper. But I think that usually when I see profiles like this, I'm like, okay, so somebody became CEO, they probably had a posh life and posh upbringing, and then they went through the normal routine steps of, I don't know, some Ivy League school and then going to some MBA, and then, okay, now we're going to continue raising up the ranks and get CEO. It's not as if like there's this opening advertising, oh, we want a new CEO for our company. It's a relatively informal path to take. So the fact that coming from background that I personally consider to be having a much harder upbringing than I personally had is very fascinating for me personally, and I think most people who are attending right now. So exactly, that's what I'm talking about. Usually I think that people coming from a background where you could say they're either disadvantaged or at least they're not privileged in some sense, would probably think of how can we get by as opposed to like how can we go and like raise the ranks and become VP at Twitter, then later move on to become CEO at another company. And how you, I guess, how you took that, those issues while growing up and then maintain that. Did you take any force out of that to help you proceed in your life, or did you find that was a hindrance, especially like as you mentioned your background initially in New Hampshire, the effect of growing up in that situation? Did that have any specific learnings for you?
It's there was a honest to God, there was such an incredible support system for me. And when I graduated, I think I from mentors that I work with, colleagues, I found this deep sense of generosity of people when you ask for help, there and when you genuinely try and you're reaching out to try to essentially learn from others. There is this sense of giving or generosity that exists among people that I experienced throughout my career. That I attribute. I mean, when I first joined Marriott, I was, I was like I was a waiter. I worked at a restaurant at a small property, and I applied for this finance job that I was not at all qualified for in the second most profitable property for Marriott at that time, which was Anaheim, right by the convention center, by Disneyland. It's just like very, very well-respected property within the broader Marriott ecosystem. And I think I guess the main point of like, if you're coming in from a place of disadvantage, it really is, at least for me as a, Iranian American, as an immigrant, as someone who came here, not speaking English, I just found an insane amount of generosity across the people that I came, and that may have been luck, that may have been just like a willingness to ask for help and seek people out, which I hope, I think you did, and in the first time you reached out to me, and I think just being willing to give someone else a chance to help is the first step. And you may not get this equal amount of willingness for others to participate, but first time I moved to the Bay Area, I'll give you a very tangible example. I joined Twitter in 2010, which was like the tail end of the credit crisis, and like tech was starting to pick up Facebook, LinkedIn were like the first wave of successful, companies that were showing the proof of social taking off. And Twitter was on the kind of like the next one, right? And we're like 100 employees, and when I joined the company, this was predates AWS, Amazon and Google Cloud Services. Like we had our own data center, and there were all these problems that were unprecedented, and there were very few people in Silicon Valley that had to go through some of the pain points of having to go through scaling hardware in the fashion that Twitter at that point had to. And I just reached out to people that worked in data center ops at Facebook, and I reached out to folks at LinkedIn. I reached out to people at Google, and they just picked up the phone. Like everybody took the call, everybody got on, everyone kind of chimed in. We're trying to build a capacity model on how our needs were going to evolve to try to figure out how much money we need to raise. It was incredible. It was just like literally 100% of the people that I reached out to responded and were willing to help out. And I think that just sense of being willing to reach out can have a tremendous amount of impact.
Nice. So I guess a very positive experience with reaching out to people and not being, I guess, too stressed or too concerned about, what are people going to think, but actually just reach out. What's the worst that can happen? More often than not, positive things happen, and we can be optimistic towards that. And can I ask, like, you're currently in a tech industry, and then starting off coming from Marriott and then going down the path, you've changed industries a couple of times. Can I ask if you initially thought you would end up in this industry, or like, did you have this long-term vision? There, like, I guess there are two different debates about how to do life. Should it be that I should have this like 20-year plan, and like, oh, I know that on this day and this month and this year I'm going to be here, or more as in like go with the flow and whatever comes, just have an overall vision of where you want to be within the next, for example, 20 years. Yeah, can I ask how that went for you and what you would recommend?
Yeah, I don't think folks on this call would be surprised that both my brother and I were like pre-meds in undergrad, and the whole both my mom and dad are doctors, and naturally, we were following in that path. And Romina, by the way, I have nothing but respect for the medical profession, and but we were on that same journey. And I was initially a biochem major, and my brother's now he's in field practicing chemistry. But the short answer is I never had a 10-20-year plan. I decided that I wanted to work in business primarily because I thought I became fascinated with the organizational component of building, product, marketing a product, growing a product, and just what it takes to expand or grow a business. And the thing that really got me excited about doing that was just like the concept that there's nothing, you couldn't fathom, accomplishing the types of things that businesses could accomplish when more than one individual came together, right? So how do you get 10 people to march in the same direction? How do you get 30 people? How do you get 100 people? How do you get 1,000 people? And I think that concept of being able to essentially be a lot more ambitious about the kind of impact and influence that you want to have in whatever capacity, right? And being able to come together with a bunch of folks and accomplishing that in business, that was the kind of the main motivation for me to make the jump. And then it's sort of like the main thing that I had for me going into business was, first, I just wanted to learn all facets of it. And so I started out in the kind of finance controllership hub. And then I went out and started exploring the capital markets and how companies raise money, why they raise money, worked on that side. And then the idea of coming back to operating and working in tech happened out of passion, like meaning when I was in New York, there was in 2009 was when there was a window where students, and there was a broader uprising in Iran, and kind of like internet access and things kind of got slowly shut down, and I couldn't get a hold of my parents, and like I had to go on Twitter #Tehran to be able to like follow what was going on in Iran, um, and so I started proactively looking up Twitter and like, what is this company? What are they doing? This is amazing. Like it's like a groundbreaking, and the CFO over there was Ali Rogani, who's another Iranian, and him and I connected through a colleague of mine that worked at the same firm that I was at. And as I talked to, like, I had breakfast with Ali and we talked about Twitter, and he kind of said, hey, I'm building this thing. Do you want to join? And the rest is history. Like that's how I joined Twitter. So there was no master plan, and none of this was architected. I didn't have a plan to become a CEO. I've been trained in finance for my whole life. I've wanted to I wanted to make an impact in the organizations that I've been a part of. And I think both the curiosity, the desire to make an impact, and finding what you're good at, and just being willing to be patient, with opportunities that match your passion, match what your interests are. And of course, as I say this, is like a common, thing that you follow your dream, everything will work out. There's a lot of there's an incredible amount of luck, and being in the right place at the right time, the right opportunity that ends up playing a factor. And the question is just, are you willing to take advantage? Like many people, have the opportunity to jump in and ultimately influence that. I think the being prepared and taking advantage and being able to capitalize on those opportunities is really the key. But there was no plan, is the short answer.
Sense. I guess the main takeaway I'd have from that would be to first off try and put yourself in the right place in the right time as possible, and in line with doing that, try to get advice and help from as many people as possible, as many people who are in the know as possible. And especially in your case, I mean, this has always been something that comes up, especially at Stanford, which I find it's more prevalent than it is at maybe other universities or friends that I have at other universities, which is the importance of having a network of positive connections to push you in that direction. As they say, like you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. In line with that, it appears as if you've done a really good job of that yourself. For example, for Twitter, going through the connection with Ali Rouhani. And I'd like to ask what your tips and advice would be for like effective networking and trying to put yourself in that proper network and like positively connecting with these people in like, I guess, in a small number of interactions.
I think there's an incredible amount of there's a deep amount of value in finding some common ground, some authenticity in making that connection. I think the reality is, like, given the takeoff of how crowded LinkedIn and all these different platforms are, it's difficult to keep up, with the number of inbounds and messages and all the stuff that you get pinged on. But I mean, I look back to like every opportunity I have, I do engage on all of the inbounds that are genuine, and there's some kind of like there's something real when someone has an idea, has an interest, and is genuinely just trying to help with their goals, right? And either get clarity, bounce something off of someone, learn something from their experience, and just being willing to spend the 5 minutes to craft something that is real and can establish that initial connection, I think will go a long way in sort of how do you get someone to actually connect and respond. Because I have seen an incredible amount of just like generic stuff that folks send out, and that stuff typically doesn't work because everyone's busy and it just doesn't connect. And then I don't know, Shab, were you also thinking more in terms of who should I network with other than how? I want to make sure
I guess the how was the main aspect of it, but the who is also certainly applicable as well. Especially, for example, when you don't know where you're going to end up. Like as you mentioned, you didn't know that you want to end up where you are right now. So how do you even choose to connect with people that would lead you to where you are right now when you don't even know exactly where your destination is?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think like the best part is like Nazanin was saying, she's debating, between these two potential paths that she might pursue on computer science or economics. It's like there's Stanford and broader like Bay Area. There's so many people that have either gone in one of those or have made the pivot from one to the other. There's an incredible amount of networking that can be done in just like talking to someone who's 10 years in to one of those things, right? Or 5 years into one of those things, and learning from their experience, learning from, now granted, everything, from this conversation to every other conversation, you got to take with a grain of salt because your experience is going to be completely different, right? Like someone could have had their own background and biases, and what influenced their journey. But they're an input, and the more informed you are, the more insights that you can pick up, the better off you're going to be. And when there's so much wealth of that knowledge available, it would be really unfortunate to not tap it.
Makes perfect sense. In line with that, can I ask if you look back yourself a good number of years ago when you were just starting off in your career, when you were just about to graduate from university, can I ask if there's one singular piece of advice you would give to yourself with all the experience that you've came through with your unique path, what that would be? Would it be to be more positive, be more optimistic,
Yeah.
to, to connect more, whatever it might be, looking back, you would tell yourself?
I mean, if there was I had like a character limit, give one word. It's just.
I mean, no, this isn't Twitter.
I would have. I know. I'm just thinking. I probably would have started out with just being patient. The time. I've realized, more and more, like at every juncture, there's been real trade-offs between things that would give you a short-term, boost over setting you up for a more long-term, better outcome. And I think this is one of those things where if you're not intentional, the bias or the default tends to be short-term. And you optimize for short-term outcomes, you optimize for short-term results. And so on that note, I just like being better about taking the time horizon into consideration and being long-term greedy is what I would have told myself, when I was 18 or 21 or whatever age that you're putting me back in. And then the second thing I would have honestly probably said, which is something that I do like crazy now. I started this 2 years ago. Was tracking my time. I read this book, How to Measure Your Life, a few years back, and he had this really profound. The author had this really beautiful quote around the way that you ultimately, there's this famous saying in finance, when you go to a person in finance, he will say, don't tell me what's important to you, show me your budget, like where are you spending your money. And then for human beings, it's like, don't tell me what's important to you, show me your where you spend your time, because that's our most valuable currency. And so I started tracking my time. There's this A Tracker Pro, which is an app, which is like this German, app developer that makes the app. It's super lightweight. You can, most time tracking apps in iOS are for like people who build, are like billing their time. This one is just like a very casual way to categorize and see where you're spending your time. And I started doing this, and you know, my wife, I'm married, and I have 3 kids, 8-year-old daughter, 4-year-old son, and 1-year-old son. And my wife at the time was like, "There's no way you're going to be able to do this," you know. I genuinely, I'm like, look, I'm curious. I want to know where I'm spending my time and how it's being spent. I want to be intentional, really intentional about it. And it has been a game changer. I mean, if you can have the discipline, you're going to learn a lot about, you know, and this is, by the way, this is not something that's like, you know, you track your time and then you become, you know, obsessed about like bending some time curve, you know, in a meaningful way in one direction or another, but just like learn from it, right? Observe it, understand it, and then be patient with yourself as you want to go through making the pie charts look different, right, based on what you hope for them to be. But that's the other thing.
Wonderful. No, that's a really good point. I have to confess that I've been trying to do this for, I can say, weeks now. And I keep on saying, okay, like next day. And I keep putting that back just because I become short-term greedy and trying to meet the demand of whatever is on the table right now. And I've only managed to do the long-term planning like that a couple of times in my life, and that has been really positive and helpful. In line with that, that's a really good point to make time your real currency, as opposed to maybe either money or just a target, a short-term target. And I guess on a different topic, I'd like to ask you, because I see time's flying and I want to have some Q&A near the end for participants. Can I ask if you ever struggle with confidence, and if so, how you overcome it, and what advice you would have to anybody new entering business to be able to overcome imposter syndrome, or generally feeling like, what am I doing here? There are a ton of other people better than me.
Yeah, it's you know, the classic, you know, thing that happens is as you do well, and you know, you may like, you get promoted, right? And you get promoted and you're given more responsibilities and you have new challenges, and and a lot of times, you know, you're in over your head, you know. And it's like at Twitter when we were 100 employees and I was given like a bunch of hats to wear. I mean, there's so many of these things. I had no idea what I was doing, right? It was like a lot of stuff that was brand new. I was kind of learning on the job, and the confidence component kicks in, where at some threshold you're like, look, this is how the how you overcome it, right, is being patient with yourself, being willing to be humble enough to acknowledge when and where you actually need to learn and grow. I think the biggest part on the confidence part that has shaken and has become really difficult is, for me, was when, you know, the first time that I had a large enough team to manage. You know, there was that was probably the biggest moment in my career where I really felt this like weight, you know, and on my shoulder of you know, wow, this is like I'm responsible for the growth, for the development, for the success of this team, and then in my first like year as a manager, I was a horrible manager, you know. And there's just like, it's the God honest truth, and there's so many things I learned in that year, and I'd honestly say the confidence comes so much down to your ability to hopefully have mentors that have been in your shoes, who are willing to share their experiences of having been into that step. For me, I had someone in at that time period that I was able to learn from, that was honestly pivotal in the way that I was able to bend the curve in my professional career and then advance from there. And I think the truth is, like, many of you are, well, all of you deserve a great amount of applause for being where you are. You know, there's a very few percentage points of the whole population that makes it to, you know, the institution that you're a part of right now. And the reality is, you know, as you move on from Stanford, there's going to be points in your careers where, you may hit that wall. And there's an ability to kind of say, look, be patient with yourselves and reach out to others. I guarantee you there's someone else who's gone through the same experience, who's been through the same, and in that moment of doubt, just reach out for help and try to have someone to go through the journey with you, and don't try to isolate and kind of like try to solve everything on your own type of a thing.
So that's a really good point. I guess my main takeaway from that would be to instead of try to optimize for having the best performance as soon as you land in a job, and instead of worrying about whether or not you're going to suck, because it's not really a question, you're certainly going to suck. Nobody starts off excellent. Just try to find a place where you have the support structure so that you can actively suck, and at the same time, just try to optimize for how quickly can I get myself to be a professional in the field that I'm entering, with a supportive network of people. As you mentioned, like nobody sits behind a bicycle and becomes a professional cyclist. We need to fall down and try to improve, just have that coach to help us. That makes perfect sense. Changing that mentality, even though it's easily said, but much harder done, to try and change that mentality and try to be accepting of the nature of us being human. So thank you very much for that pointer. And last but not least, I'd like to ask one thing that is really valuable, especially for, I guess, our generation, is trying to find purpose in life, trying to do something that we think is meaningful and has a meaningful impact on the future, not just prospering. At least, well, I mean, maybe to some extent it's superficial, but at least most people that I know do have this feeling that, okay, we have to do something that we feel is having a positive impact in the world. Can I ask how you see that taking place for yourself, and like what do you personally consider to be the legacy of your life, and how would you recommend people to look at that aspect of their lives?
Totally. I think for me, it's been such a I've two areas in my life, right? So I've got my family and my company, and I think there's such a profound component of your ability to influence the people around you. And so the legacy, or the kind of the print, things that you want to leave behind, for me is what is the will people who join Mixpanel, will they experience the biggest growth of their professional career when they're at Mixpanel? Will they be able to be in a place where the culture, the interaction with their colleagues, their interaction with the leadership, will it leave effectively a new bar, that they can take with them, and then they can hopefully bring additional influence to future organizations that they're a part of. And ultimately my role as a dad, my good husband, am I ultimately able to effectively make a positive impact in all of my essentially connections to the people that in some shape or form depend on me. And honestly, that's the measure for me. And if I can do a good job of that, then I'm happy, and that's the influence of the company then becomes a manifestation of, we're a software company. It's just like the product is built by people, and it's sold by people, and it's grown by and delivered by people. And the 300 people at Mixpanel, or my current company, are the organization. We are the company. And so the ability to really set the stage where we can have a company where people can feed off one another, grow, advance, excel. I think the mission of the company gets fulfilled, and the mission of the company, of course, reaches a broader group of ecosystem, right? That's our partners, our customers, and then all of a sudden, you have this cascading effect of your ability to influence. But I wouldn't go. There's very few human beings, that have the kind of reach that Larry Page, and others in his category have. I would just begin with the your immediate circle, the people that are around you. And you'll be amazed at what a difference it makes when you become intentional about those relationships. And anyway, that's my bit on that.
Nice. Thank you very much. And as for my final question before we go on to Q&A, can I ask if there are any specific experiences that you had that you think you would have liked to do something differently about them, or if there were any mistakes you wish that you could have avoided, done differently in your professional path, of course?
I think in the first half of my career, I was I was shying away from risk quite a bit in taking bolder steps and being willing to walk into unknown territory. I just wish I would have done that sooner. Is the truth, and that's kind of the more or less like trusting yourself in making those decisions, and not kind of confining yourself to just the known. Being on the kind of the defined grid is not really it just, you don't have to be confined to what's defined, essentially.
So I know I said that was my last question, but your answer has me with another question.
Yeah.
And I'm just considering, can I ask what made you take that leap of going to taking more risks? And because usually you feel like, okay, I want to get to a stable position so that I can then take risks. I hear this from a lot of people. But then when that stable situation actually materializes, is a question that nobody knows the answer to.
Yeah. I think it's part of it has to do with the fact that it's if you're naturally someone who wants to create change, right, and you want to really influence the way things, to make progress, right, you have to really change, and you have to get into environments and places where you're most able to create or lead change. And so by default, most of the things that fall into willingness to accept change or giving you the chance to lead a lot of change fall into a more risky territories of the economy. And so, most of the economy that's on the more stable, growth path are unwilling to take as big of leaps. And I think for you to kind of make your own determination of when and how you want to make that leap and go off the grid. I mean, I'm using that word kind of loosely, but I mean it's there's some obvious paths you can follow to continue to have a successful career, right? You can go to well-known brands after your grad school and just keep building on that. And there's nothing wrong with that, and you get an incredible amount of learning and development doing that. But to really genuinely influence change, you may have to step out of the grid a bit.
Makes perfect sense. I mean, no risk, no reward, I guess, or no, at least disproportionate reward.
Yeah.
And so thank you very much for your time. We're at the 45-minute mark right now. I'd like to open it up to all the attendees. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves one-on-one and ask questions. I'd usually say just type them in the chat, but given that the number of attendees are relatively small, I'm thinking this can help us have a more casual situation.
Yeah, please. And by the way, we can stay on the topics that Shahab has covered, or we can go.
Yeah. Feel free to ask pretty much anything.
Any direction you want.
I just have a general question regarding opportunities. By the way, thanks for sharing all of your insight with us. It was really useful and great to hear your story. So my question is, you mentioned a lot about having patience and finding opportunities that kind of match your passion. Do you have any advice on how we can recognize a good opportunity from a bad one? In this digitalized world, there's so many, opportunities. Like you can go on LinkedIn and you see this and this and that. And I'm just wondering, do you have any words of wisdom on how to recognize a good opportunity?
And Romina, is this more like related to like a which company to join, or is it more broader than that?
We can talk about which company, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a little bit narrower. I can more easily
Yeah.
touch that one at least.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is if you're looking at kind of like I'll break this. I'll assume we're talking about startup, growth companies in the Bay Area. There's a handful of really trusted angel investors slash even things that are like publicized in terms of fast growing startups, companies to kind of start looking at who's being funded by the leading investors, in Silicon Valley. That's an easy way for you to at least understand a bit of is this a good product? Is it a good market? I think you have pretty good third party validation on the market opportunity and the product by just looking at the investor base and who's behind the company. And then the second component then is if being able to understand and learn about the founders, the leadership team. What's their background? What do they care about? What kind of culture are they trying to build? And where's the strength of the company? Is it a product-led organization? Is it a go-to-market sales-led organization? And then the third component is, based on your role and what potential role you're considering, how much of a importance and impact can it have on this company, given where they are in with respect to their stage. Those are pretty helpful 3 notes, because then okay, so I have a good product that has a good trajectory. What's the culture, leadership like? What kind of tone is this setting? Is this a environment that I want to be a part of? And then the third is, what's my what will be my influence, right, and impact in this company? Will I make a difference? Will I be able to have a large enough canvas to be able to ultimately, write my part of this narrative as the company grows? I think those are the three dimensions I would try to come at.
And let's say you kind of check off all 3 of those boxes. Would you recommend just kind of cold calling them or just reaching out to them and asking if you could join? Or
I would try to always there's always some sort of there's some connection you can establish within your network. It typically ends up at being a much better path. And so let's hypothetically say you found a company where you now know the investor, the board members, the executives, and their key connections. I would try to establish connections with their broader ecosystem and understand their ecosystem a bit, and then through that ecosystem try to get connected to the company itself. A more effective way of getting introduced.
Okay.
It might not be as efficient, but it probably will yield better results.
Great, thank you.
Sounds cool. So can I actually ask a question? Probably. So you encourage basically taking risks, and I think that definitely makes sense, and I think that's a great advice. But like the only thing that I actually wanted to ask is that just like kind of like as an immigrant, how you kind of like overcome the uncertainty that it is basically associated with the taking risks, specifically for the case that you are not like that much grounded, like what I mean. So kind of like that pressure of like the risk and uncertainty that might be sometimes overwhelming, and maybe discouraging. So I was basically wondering what is your advice and what's your strategy for specifically overcoming that, overcoming the uncertainty.
It's just, so the thing is like you right now you're in a position where you have such an incredibly large and growing economy I don't know what sector you're in. I'm just gonna assume tech. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that is fair.
Okay. No matter how big of a leap, no matter how much risk you take right now, there is such an incredibly large and growing pool of companies and ideas and people that are trying to go and influence something meaningful that there is unlikely to be what your imagination of a worst case scenario is probably far, far beyond the actual worst case scenario. And if Shahab, posts this on YouTube, then I've gone on the record of guaranteeing some kind of a soft landing, for whatever risk you're about to take. But it just genuinely being realistic, right? Of this, it's never helpful to ultimately have this kind of like a worst case scenario in your mind that's like earth shattering, or like the worst like 0.01% probability of happening. And so bringing yourself to a rational distribution of what is the probability of, this thing not working out and what happens next, I think will help you ease your mind of, it's okay. Even if I take this leap and this doesn't work out, I'm going to be fine. And my sense is your probability distribution is quite favorable given where you are and what's going to lay ahead of you.
I see. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think on the expected value, I would say, yeah, that is definitely true. That, but like basically sometimes like people, I don't know, like maybe for me at least myself, like just thinking about like what can happen, like for example, if it is going wrong, or like what about the worst case scenario, like it's definitely really good, like to be optimistic always, and I'm definitely in support of that. But yeah, I think just getting out of like this mindset of always also checking what can also go wrong and what's the worst case scenario, I think hopefully. I think it will help. So yeah, thank you so much for that advice. That's great.
Of course.
I actually have a question that is kind of related to the last two. So you've had a multitude of not only positions, but also you've worked in many different industries. What, I guess, throughout this trajectory of getting to where you are, what was the catalyst that would, let you realize that, okay, I can jump from where I am right now, where I might be very established or have a lot of room to grow, and am no doubt learning a lot and, gaining a lot of different things, to this other opportunity, maybe aside from gut feeling?
Yeah, like meaning, so what are the points in which I say, okay, time for the next chapter, or time to,
Exactly.
It's they're all really different. The chapter in between Twitter, for example, was much more of a geographic. So I met my wife in New York. We moved to San Francisco together, and then our daughter was 3 years old, and we were like, we've been bi-coastal, and New York is a bubble, Bay Area is quite a bubble. And so let's just like go to Austin, Texas, and see what life is like outside of these two bubbles. And we did that. And, one summer in Texas is enough to make you realize you love the bubble and you want to get back in the bubble. And by the way, for anyone in the future potentially watching this, I loved Austin, the barbecue, the music, the culture, absolutely an amazing place to be. But we then got pregnant. Well, my wife got pregnant with our second, and my wife's family's here. The mother's network is here, so we came back shortly after that. But that was kind of like a much more like a personally driven move. I'd say the decision to move on from Twitter is I lived 5 lifetimes at Twitter. I was it's like from 100 to 500 employees to 1,000 to 4,000. It was like I experienced so many different stages of the company that 2013 is when we went public, and Dick Costello was the CEO at that point. We talked, and it's like, look, I'm going to stay for a couple of years, and Dick is an incredible mentor and was absolutely amazing in sort of saying, look, here are the things we'll do after going public. And then he kind of like, as a great manager does, gave me the freedom to go explore the next chapter, beyond Twitter. And so I'd say, more or less, one thing I would encourage you is include your include your manager. Believe it or not, like people, like nobody wants to be surprised about your departure. Like blindsiding people that are investing in you, want you to grow. You'd be amazed at how supportive they're going to be. You'd be like, hey, for these reasons, I'm considering, the next thing, and they'll let them participate in your growth. Almost every single move I've had in my career has come with a recommendation or some sort of like networking from my existing boss. So I would really recommend letting folks around you to just be open about the kind of things that you want to explore as you enter the workforce.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks so much, Amir, for this very interesting talk and really amazing career. So I have one question. How do you do the work-life balance? So how do you do that balance? Because you're a CEO now. I'm sure there's a lot of everything that goes wrong goes to you. So do you have any suggestion?
Yeah. So the first thing is download that app I just mentioned, the A-Tracker Pro. It's in some ways, I think for me, balance in life has not been like balance is not this sense of like, okay, I need to put X here and X here, and as long as the time is equal, or as long as always maintain this balance, everything works out. I actually think there's these forces, right, that are pushing, and they're coming at you from in all these different directions, right? And it's obviously your commitment to your family. It could be your professional commitments. It could be things that are blindsiding you from, other things that you haven't anticipated, friendships, all these other different things. And the sense of balance to me, I think, comes in what are these different endpoints? What do they need from you? What is your commitment, role, expectation? And I think being clear about that ends up then essentially establishing this point of giving yourself enough slack and flexibility to know that you're not going to always have equal distribution everywhere, right? Even if you thought like, okay, this is going to be 50% here and 30% here and 20% here, it's never going to work out that way. That's not life. It's not realistic. And so being willing to understand what is the absolute minimum commitment that you're going to have to your work, your family. And, one of the best things, like my house, for my wife, is there are things that she knows that she can count on me. There are things that it's not like an optional, like, oh, I'm so glad Amir's helping out with, doing the dishes tonight, or he's helping out, putting the kids to bed, or he's helping out with bath time, or doing X, Y, Z. It's, there's a kind of like establishing a point where my wife can count on me, not as a, hey, that's a nice to have, but it's I can count on Amir to do these things with respect to what my responsibilities are at home. And similarly, what your minimum commitment is to everything else in your life. And then you leave plenty of slack to be able to stretch to where you're needed. My daughter may have all of a sudden like a thing that's going on that she really needs me for, and I need to put a lot more time in that bucket, quality time in that bucket. And that's what I'll do. And I have enough leverage and know how to ultimately be able to make the trade-offs to be able to make that happen. But if you're overcommitted everywhere, if your baseline of like your minimum expectation everywhere is your time commitment is at 99%, you can never have that kind of a throttle. So leave enough slack for yourself to be able to move. Work may go crazy, and you need to bend and say, hey, I need to go here for go deep and put a lot more hours into this bucket. Just be patient with yourself, and then set things up in a way where you have a little bit of slack room.
So that was a question from Amir to Amir. So that was interesting. Other than that, I think we really need to get some advice from you on where to shop for managers, because it appears as if one of the major drivers of success in your life have been really good managers. Yeah. Not going after like brand names, I guess, as opposed to like going after good managers.
It's so true. show up. It's like it's like this person when you join a company, obviously the most interactions you're going to have are with your manager. They're the point person that's going to set you up for success, give you tools, give you advice, give you goals, their framework of their frame of reference. All these things are going to shape who what you're going to do and how you're going to mold for the foreseeable future. So I would absolutely say put a lot of token in understanding your own compatibility, your ability to understand what drives them, and before jumping into anything, make sure that you are clear about the management philosophy, management style, and what is driving this person. And so, yeah, that's a great catch, and 100% something that I would say has a more than profound impact on the way that your career gets shaped, or the managers you're going to have and people who are going to influence your career.
Again, it's perfectly, I mean, I believe it's perfectly obvious and perfectly understandable. It's just that we usually forget it in the interest of, let's say, brand name. Similar to, for example, when you're applying to graduate programs, you might apply to a university just because of the university, but then you might not be with the professor you'd like, as opposed to another university where it might be lower ranking or less prestigious, but you'd be with a professor who you can be more than just having them as your advisor, maybe having them as your friend, who can help you advance in your life. So thank you so much, Amir. It's been more than the 1 hour slot that we've asked you for. So as always, thank you so much for your generosity with your time. And I'm happy that I think pretty much anybody who had questions was able to ask them. And yeah, with that, I guess we'll say goodbye and wish you happy holidays. And there was this, forget it. There was this video with like this clapping sound that I wanted to put, but I think it's going to be pretty lousy if I put it on from my phone to come here. I should have shared screen, but then our program wasn't really fitting to sharing the screen. But yeah, thank you very much. I can see we've got some thank yous coming in through chat as well. Thank you very much. I'll just go with a simple reaction of clapping for you. And thank you very much. Take care and happy holidays.
Well, happy holidays to all of you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much.
Everyone.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
So much, Amir.
Bye-bye.